First question. What just happened to free speech? Graham Linehan was banned from doing comedy at the Edinburgh Fringe. Why? Because some people don't like what he has to say. His opinions on gender did not align with a couple of venues at the festival, and the pressure from some loudmouth activists was enough to cancel him. Graham believes that children should not be put on medical drugs that block puberty and lead them to a sex change. And he thinks that women don't have penises. Not exactly what I'd call earth-shattering views. This guy has written some of the greatest comedy shows of all time. Father Ted, Black Books, The IT Crowd. I would imagine, based purely off of his CV, that his 10-minute stand-up routine would likely have been pretty funny. But instead of holding court in a sold-out venue, Graham had to perform outside the Scottish Parliament to a large number of people. But why? When did the Fringe, which used to be the place comics could go and say whatever they wanted in the name of comedy, when did it become the bastion of lefty ideals? You don't have to like what Graham says, but for society to exist, we need to be able to listen to opposing views and have a conversation, not simply block, report and cancel those that we disagree with. I howl with laughter when I watch Dave Chappelle and Ricky Gervais making jokes about anyone and everyone. People tried to cancel them too, but they failed. What is the message we're sending by cancelling Graham Linehan? Because of his views on the trans debate, but allowing Frankie Boyle to go to the same festival and make jokes about raping women. A day of reckoning is coming. People are getting increasingly fed up of rich, privileged people. Champagne socialists who have never struggled for anything ever being now the voice of morality and justice for all. The pendulum is going to swing back the other way, and all of the politically correct nonsense we're being forced to follow will be out the window. Mark my words. Ladies, am I speaking sense?
You are speaking sense,
I think we're all going to agree on this.
Yeah,
really?
I think so.
Yeah.
The thing is, I think in the domain of comedy, I mean, obviously, I'm almost a free speech absolutist, almost. But I think in the domain of comedy, there should be equal opportunity haters. Everyone and anyone should be, unsafe. The idea that what's his name, David Chappelle, was punching down for making jokes about trans women and stuff like that. I just thought, if if your movement is hinged on the fact that no one makes jokes about you, maybe you might want to reconsider what you're all about, because you might not be a very logical movement. If it can be, broken up and shattered by a few jokes, seriously, then you're kind of making the case that your movement is illogical in the first place.
Yeah, mate, Graham Linehan, absolute comic genius when it comes to writing. Love every show he's ever been involved in. I've named a few there. There's many more projects that guy's written. Yeah. He's an absolute legend. We should be celebrating him, not cancelling him.
Well, comedy aside, I think there's a lot of hypocrisy going on, especially when it comes to left-wing activists. Because I remember, especially when I had to take a club to court for actually breaking the Equality Act of 2010. But the Equality Act is not just about, your race or your gender. It's about your belief system. It's about your opinions. So if venues, and I have to remind venues this, if they are going to start preventing people from having access to their venues or performing at their venues, they're actually breaking the Equality Act.
Really?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I think he's planning on suing them.
He should.
But I also find it very strange because, particularly his views on trans issues and all that, they're not new. I mean, this man has been at it since around 2013, for over a decade now. He's been very vocal about his views about, not letting children transition and the abuse that J.K. Rowling gets, which is completely unwarranted. I find it strange that the Fringe Festival thought to cancel a show 2 days before. Did you not know this man had these views for over a decade? But yet they'll platform people, very left-wing comedians, who could easily have had libel cases 5 to 10 years ago that no one bats an eye. And I find it it's obviously disheartening, but my biggest issue is whenever you have a reaction like this, you're going to have an equal and opposite reaction. And that's what's coming, and that's what really worries me, because people are going to go from one extreme to another, and they're just going to say whatever they want just to annoy people like this. And I don't think that's healthy.
I hate how they have tried to dress up the abuse of children by saying, anti-trans. It's not that at all. Yeah. We don't want children as young as, 10, 11, 12, up to 14 getting, their breasts done. Or we don't want them to have certain injections or Botox. Can you imagine a 14-year-old saying they're getting Botox? Everyone would be up in arms. So why is it such a travesty when people say they don't agree with children taking certain drugs, which is for changing their gender?
Yeah, well, Esther, going back to what you said about the venues in the Fringe, I believe with the one in Leith, with the first one to cancel his show, they didn't know he was on the.
Okay, so they had no idea. So they didn't know any due diligence.
So he was a special guest who the comedy troupe hadn't announced until a little bit later. But for me, it makes no difference.
That's not a case as well. And I think, the fact I was going back to what you were saying about calling him anti-trans. I don't even know what that is. What does it mean to be anti-trans? To have critical views about not mutilating children or, not having biological men, no matter what they claim to be, in women's sports. I find it very, very strange. And I made the point, particularly when it comes to sort of how we treat gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
I watched a show in the US about a decade ago, and there was a man who was obsessed with cutting off his left arm. He said his left arm shouldn't have been there. He didn't feel comfortable with it. He felt it was a massive dysphoria of his, and he shouldn't be there. And every time he cut it, he put it in the fridge, and then they'd have to stitch it back up, right? And I'm like, we don't treat dysphoria of the leg, for instance, of the arm in any way, but somehow we treat dysphoria with your gender, mutilating your sexual organs, as something that's, fine, and it's just based on your identity. And I just think, what other body part do we do this with?
Well, look, getting back to the festival and Graham Linehan, do you think perhaps, and I'm not defending the festival at all because I think it's abhorrent that they would cancel him, but is it the way that he's saying these things rather than what he's saying?
I think if we're going to take the approach where we're being sensitive towards, let's say certain minority groups, which I belong to, women or any other group, then we need to do it across the board. It's funny how recently in more film, there's negativity and criticism towards men or like white middle-aged men or white people, or even when I watched like Black Panther, I love Black Panther, but calling white people colonizers when not all white people, a tiny fraction of white people actually colonized certain parts of the world. So if we're going to really go down this road, let's ban everything, and then there'll be nothing to watch.
Yeah.
And nothing to laugh about.
Well, Frankie Boyle, as I spoke about earlier, he made some... I didn't find the jokes about rape funny,
Yeah.
but I'm not saying for him to be cancelled. But
Yeah.
why is he not being stopped from performing? Is it because he's a lefty?
Because there's a hierarchy, there's a totem pole of people that you can and you cannot offend, which is why I said if your whole ideology is hinged on the fact that people don't punch down or say mean things about you, then you're giving up the case. Your ideology is not worth even listening to. I think in the case of Graham Linehan, I've seen a few tweets here and there. I mean, the one that originally got him banned, I think it was to do with some sort of rally, and there were a bunch of trans activists and anti-trans activists that kind of clashed, which it feels so strange to say this. And I think he said something about killing them or something. He tweeted something like that. Obviously, I do recognize that in both of these movements, you can have incendiary voices and they're not really helpful. Obviously, one of the reasons why he came back on Twitter is because Elon Musk brought him back on. So I do recognize that he has.
So do you think, following on from what you said, there should be a level, now we know how the world's going with social media, there should be a level of responsibility for artists?
There's always been a level of responsibility, and I think of civility. I do think no matter what you're talking about and who you're talking about, you should always try and maintain a level of civility. But I think that's personal responsibility as opposed to putting the onus on artists, because they're individuals as well. And I recognize that. But I think, again, why can someone joke about rape but not about a man believing he's a woman? I mean, that's even for me, that's 10 times funnier. I mean, literally.
Graham Linehan, what he's doing, as he has said in his own words, is he is trying to make safe spaces for his wife, or now ex-wife, and for his daughter. That's
we were talking about this earlier.
Yeah.
Like, in your household, your family, mine, I wasn't born here, I'm from Barbados, and you get to say pretty much anything. And it's hilarious, and we laugh at each other, we love each other after, and it builds resilience. And I think this whole, even when I speak to people that are like under 20, the amount that offends them now is just pathetic. And I'm concerned for them, because when they actually face certain hardships in the world, how are they going to deal with that if every little tiny thing is like, oh my God, I'm crying because you called me a I
do think there's a cultural element to this, because I think there's some people that are just not used to hearing these things. Obviously, we can say that, we're African, we're Caribbean or whatever. And so the culture around speech is different. Like, my mother would see you as like, you become so skinny. What is wrong with you? You said it. But,
you have become very skinny, to be fair.
I'm not dignifying that.
I can still see some shape and stuff.
I'm still there. But, there's some people that come from cultures where they're a lot more mute about it. And I don't think it's inherently British culture. I mean, the British culture is more reserved, but I don't think it's inherent to be just mute about the bloody obvious, right?
But
I think that's taken hold.
Aren't we now seeing, for inclusion to work, certainly at the Fringe Festival, for them to have their inclusion of everyone's welcome, they are now excluding people who want to make jokes targeted at anyone and everyone. It would be ultimate inclusion. As you say, Dave Chappelle can make a joke about black men, and I'm going to laugh at the joke. Being a black man, I don't care, I find it funny. If Dave Chappelle makes a joke about a trans woman or a trans man or a kid, he makes jokes about his own children, I still laugh at those jokes because they're funny. Inclusion for me should be no one's excluded, you can all be made fun of.
But I think some of us who are advocates of freedom of speech, I think some of it is our fault, because we are rolling over If this was them on the left, they would be suing, they would be marching, they would be doing all these things.
Yeah.
Whereas, like I said, if you are going to ban someone from your venue, okay, why is it only coming out now as it's such a big, he may sue them? Whereas this should have got logged ages ago. Okay, I've said this, I'm operating under my freedom of expression, freedom of speech, human rights, Equality Act, do something and I will take you to court.
I completely agree with what I think is the majority of people in this country, that free speech is being eroded.
This is what you're saying, because actually even the lines between the left and the right have become quite blurred. I was often making the point that, traditional lefties in this country were the most socially conservative pockets in this country. You had people in the 50s and 60s that were from working class backgrounds, they were soldiers and all of that, and they had a real reverence for the monarchy, for the community, what it meant to be British and all of that. And that's completely lost. Even the traditional left-right divide doesn't exist anymore. So I don't actually think these people are lefties. I think they are narcissists. I think they live in their own champagne socialist bubble, and I think they operate under an ideology of their own. Yeah, exactly.
I think a lot of these people, without having something to fight for, which oftentimes is much to do about nothing, they have no identity.
Yeah,
and we're seeing
privileged.
more and more of this, where they fail to have their own identity, so they get involved in these sorts of activism projects just so they can be seen and heard. Yeah. But when you even ask them off of social media, outside of their projects, they don't even believe half of it themselves.
Yeah, seriously. No, seriously, they're not about anything. And I say that when in the absence of any real struggle, in the absence of it being rooted in a community and having a vision to look forward to, these are the kinds of fringe things that you make a big deal out of. When I tell people, there are people parts of the world that people are thinking of what to eat or how to feed their children, like real issues. Yeah. And yet you have these people saying, oh no, but the real issues is you might hurt trans people's feelings.
Yep. Well,
they would say it's relative, though, isn't it? They would say,
it's nonsense. It's a nonsense.
Yeah, they would say it's relative.
Okay, well, we'll talk about this all day, but we haven't got time, ladies. Yeah, so put a suck in it. All right?
All right. No, you've hurt my feelings.
Well, now it is time for a bad ad. Okay, this week we are looking at Big Al's Pizza.
I'm hungry. Well, why don't we give Big Al's Pizza a call? I heard they're the best pizza in town.
All right. Got it.
You idiots. I said Big Al's Pizza, not Big Owl's Pizza.
For the best pizza in town, make sure you get the name and number right. Big Al's Pizza, 452-7200.
Honestly, that's where CGI goes to die. What? You know those, and I'm not saying I watch porn. I'm not saying I watch porn, but you know those really bad. You know those.
That old chestnut. Oh yeah.
No, but you know those really bad porn films of the 80s. Where it's like, ding dong, the handyman's at the door.
How
we don't know. We don't know.
Tell
us more, Esther. Tell us more.
Tell us more.
I don't know.
You don't watch porn, but you can tell me exactly.
Exactly. I know, right?
The full storyboard of a porn.
It's okay if you do. We won't judge.
Well, I hope J.K. Rowling does not see that advert, because surely she'll be wanting some of that cash, right?
Honestly, oh
Good
God.
grief.
Yeah.
I think now it's time to go to a commercial break. Yet another one of Rishi Sunak's pledges seems to be out of reach for the Prime Minister. This time it's the NHS waiting lists, which are, by the way, at a record high, with more than 7.6 million people in England waiting to be seen. In typical slimy Sunak style, he tweeted last week stating, "We've taken the next step in our plan to cut waiting lists by creating 900 new beds, guys." Well, whoop-de-doo, mate. The Tory government has cut 12,000 NHS beds since 2010. So 900 beds being brought back actually means we're still 11,100 beds short of where we used to be. 500 people die each week due to delays in care, and Sunak thinks he can feed us some spin, and we're going to just accept what he says as gospel. Earlier this month, our beleaguered Prime Minister blamed walkouts by health workers for the increase in waiting lists. But I got news for you, Rishi. Nobody believes you. A recent survey shows only 1 in 10 believe striking doctors and nurses bear responsibility, while 48% of those asked said the fault lies with the Tories. The NHS is in my blood. My mother was an NHS midwife for almost 50 years, and several of my aunties were nurses and sisters on wards too. Ultimately, it doesn't matter how many more beds we get if we don't have the staffing. Retention of nurses is at an all-time low, with more of them leaving the NHS than ever before. Painting rainbows on windows, clapping in the street for our wonderful workers is not going to pay their bills. Our nurses deserve more money, more respect, and they need a reason to stay in the profession that they love. I fear the NHS is broken beyond repair, if I'm honest, but I do hope it isn't. My other big worry, Keir Starmer. He's likely to be our next PM, but is he the man who can save our greatest institution? Or is he just what I think he is, a diet Tory? Esther.
We should be having a conversation about how do we get sort of private institutions, private healthcare to invest in healthcare in this country to get better results.
How is this government for 13 years slashed and slashed and slashed our NHS and social care whilst giving civil servants pay rises? Then they say to our nurses, you can get, what is it, a 4% pay rise offered them?
But the thing is,
it's criminal.
But there's also a big problem, which is half of what we spend on the NHS goes to non-medical staff. It goes to administrators and all of that. You know, these are issues and these are conversations we should be having about the NHS. We should be having about, you know, clinical results and all of that. Yes, the Tories haven't helped, but because they're scared, right? Most of our politicians lack the will to actually say this is what needs to be done and we need to stick on this path. It got slightly better under Blair because he did consolidate a lot of the hospitals. He did expand, you know, the input of private healthcare and all of that. But it really is at a tipping point. We need to have a bold conversation. We can't have it all.
Under the Tories, they cut the nurses' bursary, right? So we saw a massive decline in people going to...
And they encouraged nurses to go to university to rack up debt and all of that. All these unnecessary changes.
When my mother was a NHS midwife, she was working 2 additional jobs on top of being a midwife to provide for the family. No nurse or midwife should be working any other job apart from that one job. If you're bringing life into the world and you're saving lives, that should be the thing you concentrate on, not thinking, how can I feed the family? Let me get another job in a nursing home.
I mean, this is a problem we have with a lot of our public institutions as well. They've also, you know, for some reason created this idea that police officers, for instance, and, you know, particularly senior police officers need to go and get a degree to be able to rise up the management ranks instead of being experienced.
There was like, on my degree, there was a few police officers and I was like, why are you here? Like, we're paying for this as well. But one thing I struggle to understand in this conversation, it hardly comes up, the CEOs, like Amanda Pritchard, who's responsible essentially for the 130 billion given to the NHS. We never speak about her. We never speak about the CEOs and the directors. If this was...
Well, and the trusts.
Yeah. Well, they are responsible for a lot of the finances. And you see people that are being paid so much money, example, equality, diversity, this and that and the third, and the billions that is lost on the NHS.
I mean, that's just part of the wastage. But if you look at how much they waste on contractors, for instance.
No, but that as well. So if this was like a private business, there's no way that this would be able to happen.
Of course.
The CEOs would have to get around the table and say, where can we cut back? I've said this so many times. We need to have a public inquiry with auditors, go into the NHS and see exactly where the funding is going. And also, I would say...
But they ship all the consultants over from the US, and then they cost the NHS a fortune. And then we don't even end up implementing most of it because some idiot somewhere will say, oh, but the Tories want to privatize the NHS. Guess what? The NHS was most privatized under Labour. We should be talking about, one, how do we get staff in the NHS better paid, and how do we get better clinical outcomes? And every conversation should be on the table.
But you just said it. Or okay, we do those things, but then they decide not to implement them. So we've wasted all of that money to have these consultants tell us what could work better. That ain't just down to the trust.
That's down to people like Steve Barclay at the very top of the tree who's in charge of everything.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I think it's both of their issues, the government and the NHS. The NHS is not this holy grail that can't be questioned, and I think we need to question what they do with the funds. But also, social care is a massive issue as well, and I'm going to take this back to culture. I think there is a massive issue. I know it's harder with everyone working, but we do not look after our own anymore.
Parents,
We do not look after our elderly. There's something to be said for a lot of African and Asian households that have the grandmother in. That helps with childcare. That helps with their care. We don't do it. A lot of these beds are taken up by elderly who actually wouldn't say are immediately ill, but they're remaining in those beds because as families, we don't look after each other anymore.
Yeah, but where's the £350 million we were promised per week?
By the NHS.
Can you check under your chair? Is it there?
If I was sitting on it, I would be a lot taller, let me tell you.
Where has it gone?
The issue here is, I also, and again, this is why I say every conversation should be on the table, because we actually pay a lot for our NHS. Yes, the Tories have cut it, but in terms of the proportion of our GDP that we spend on our healthcare, it's an extraordinary amount. And I don't believe, because of the way it's so poorly run and because of the way it's just such a mammoth of an institution, I don't believe that just pumping more money into it is the problem. In other countries, in other European countries that get better clinical outcomes, they spend roughly the same, maybe slightly more than what we spend on our NHS, but the foundations are structurally different. So they get different outcomes. You have places like Israel where you have actually, private companies that hire their surgeons, that hire, build hospitals and all of that. And then the staff have their own bargaining power, because if you want me, you have to get me. In the Netherlands, hospitals are not allowed to run a profit. So the system that they use to run their healthcare models is completely different.
So it's not about putting more money in, but it's about
managing the money we have.
But this is what I'm saying, the money needs to go to our frontline workers. Sunak, this slippery little snake, he's not doing this out of the goodness of his heart. Listen to this. So the £250 million they're going to inject to get these beds for winter, and he says winter, he means January, so actually the latter part of winter, idiots. It's going to go across 30 NHS organisations in areas like Peterborough, Teesside, Humber Region, Guildford, Croydon and Harrow. What do these places all have in common? These are the regions with constituencies that will likely decide the outcome of the next general election. He's only doing this to try and win. He's not doing it because he thinks.
But there'll also be a bit of a time lag, because these people are not going to. They don't. How often do they go into the hospital, and how are they going to say, "Oh, there's 5 more beds"? Oh my God! You know what, Sunak? Thank you. I mean, listen. If I was Rishi Sunak, my electoral strategy would be to fill Slough with as many British Indians as I possibly can and try and make them vote for me. Because that is likely what will happen. Look, at the end of the day, he says all these things, and most politicians say things that they don't mean, or that they tiptoe around the issue. But it will take a significant amount of political will, which our politicians are acutely lacking in, to make the changes in the NHS that need to be done.
I don't think there'll be a big difference anyway. I think whether, not Keir Starmer, but I'm going towards West Streeting, probably, who will be after Keir. And I don't think when we look at the plans for the NHS, I can't see huge amounts of difference between West Streeting and Rishi Sunak. When West Streeting is asked certain questions, even about financing or, certain parts of funding, they're pretty much the same thing.
I actually think, and then this is veering off, but I think if the Labour Party put up West Streeting instead of Keir Starmer, they might see a more political... Because I'm still on the fence of who I think will win, but yeah, that's...
Really?
Yeah, no, seriously.
OK, well, we will see. Listen, my suggestion is this. Sack Steve Barclay, let Pat Cullen, head of the RCN, let her run it.
Oh my gosh.
Let her run it. Anyway, time for another bad ad now. Time for the bad ad. This is Town and Country Furniture.
Folks, hi, this is Brent, Town and Country Furniture. Folks, we're beating down the competition with lowered prices here at Town and Country Furniture. Come on in. Woo! How about this die-cast sectional for only $5.99? Folks, come on into Town and Country Furniture and see this beautiful 5-piece bedroom suite for only $5.99. Come on down to Town and Country where we're beating down the competition. Corner of 303 and Carrier Parkway, Grand Prairie, Texas.
Beating.
I can see some southern states still really buying into that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that was like, wow, that's mental illness.
Some parts of Texas would really still love that ad.
He just sounds like a quintessential American. When I think of America, I think of people like that.
Yeah.
Massively overweight. And talking about sports, beating down the competition.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're a real tough guy.
He's just missing a hot dog and a gun,
I know,
of course.
right?
Yeah. Or two.
So let me just tick that off. Offended Americans, and offended women.
Bit of xenophobia in there.
And
Exactly.
fat
And
women.
fat people,
And the British. You said British are lazy.
Yeah.
Offended the British too.
We've done it all today.
As for the transgenders, that's a twin.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Well, that is all we have time for. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me. Lynn May, making your debut on the channel.
Thank you.
And Esther, I think I'm going to see you again, probably.
Probably.
Yeah, unfortunately. Well, thank you for joining us on What Just Happened. Next week, Uncle Kev is back, so I won't be in this seat. I'll be sat over there, probably next to Esther. But we'll see you again next time.